This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Bobby Torrez. He's the host of the YouTube channel Bobby Likes It Spooky and the co-host of the Scream Kingz podcast and the People Under the Scares podcast. Welcome to the show!
Woo! I'm happy to be here. Thanks, y'all.
Finally! I've been waiting to get you on the show for forever. And I was like, I honestly, the movie we're going to talk about is so daunting that I was like, oh boy, gotta have time to watch it. But I'm so glad we finally got you on the show. But take us back to the start. How did you get introduced to horror?
My family. My family loves horror, surprisingly. And it's really very weird because I watched a lot of horror and a lot of horror movies I shouldn't have been watching as a kid. I watched a lot of Friday the 13th movies, and how much nudity is in those movies and gore and all that stuff. So it's really weird. And my mom was very picky and choosy what movies I watched. And funny enough, I was introduced to this miniseries because of my mom. And I remember watching it with her, but we'll get there. My family, we always watch horror movies. We had a local video store called West Coast Video near my house growing up. And every weekend we would go there and like rent a new movie to watch. And it was always horror. And that's how I first seen Child's Play 2 as well. And I remember I was telling my grandmother, my mom, like, I want to see Child's Play 2, whatever. And we ended up renting that. Got a vivid memory of that. And during the promo for that, they had actual Chucky doll with the suction cups on behind the hands and the feet. And I was telling my mom I wanted it. And she was just like, no, you're not getting that. So literally the next weekend, my grandmother took me back and got it for me without my mom not knowing. And it was like the best thing ever. And my mom to this day probably still don't know that. Like I always kept it at her house. So yeah, like my family, we love horror. And again, it was a lot of things I probably shouldn't have seen, but I grew up okay. So, yeah.
So you mentioned like Friday the 13th, and I it's always funny to me, and I brought this up multiple times. Like my parents were very specific about what I could watch, and so I had a rule where it was like if there's nudity on the screen, I had to cover my eyes. Were your parents were they the same way, or was it more lax?
Yes. Every time titties would pop up, they'd be like, or they make me turn my head. Or
no titties for Terry is like a joke on the show, and now we can say no titties for Bobby too.
No titties for Bobby.
They would make me go out the room, and I sometimes would try to sneak, or if they doing this, I'm like squeezing my eye, trying to peek through. So yes, they will always try to get me out the room or cover my eyes and stuff when those scenes come on.
families.
Do you remember how old you were when you watched your first horror movie?
I don't remember how old I was.
Okay.
I just know I was very young.
So you've been watching them for a long time.
Yeah. Earliest I probably would say is 4, maybe
Okay.
5.
Okay.
Cool.
Because I remember watching this movie that we were talking about around like 5.
Okay, wow.
So, and I know, yeah, you can see how
I can't wait to get to that.
So yeah, I watched it a lot at a very young age, and it's crazy because I also remember a lot of nightmares I had due to watching these horror movies.
Oh, so you were a scared kid. You got scared easily, even though you watched a lot of horror movies.
I enjoyed them when I watched it, but when it was time for me to go to bed, that's when I started to
Yep, me too.
Mm-hmm.
I was the same way. Like I wasn't scared at the moment, and then I would lay in bed and think about them and be like, "Oh no, this is a bad idea.
What did I do to myself?
Oh, the lights are off. Fuck."
Right. I would constantly like leave my TV on just so I can like wash all the horror out, put on Cartoon Network or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
But again, this movie played a huge part of me being traumatized as a kid and it messed me up horribly.
What were some of like your favorite horror movies as a kid?
Ooh, so some favorite ones. I mean, again, Friday the 13th, I watched a lot of those. They were just so much fun. I love a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies because Freddy was always just a funny horror villain to me. And I felt like, oh, if he's making me laugh, he's not that serious. Like, whatever, sure, he's not going to come get me because he's a whatever. But then it slowly went on to Michael Myers, and that's my obsession with Halloween. That's why I love Halloween so much right now, because of reasons. But I would say Friday the 13th. Jason Voorhees was a good one that I always loved. I love Leprechaun. Chucky was good. That's why.
Hell yeah.
So all like those type of movies. I mean, I remember watching The Blob as 1988 version.
Oh,
I remember seeing that
movie
when I was young.
That's one of my favorites. It's such a good movie.
So good.
So gnarly.
I remember. So they kill kids in that one. They get them out of here. They don't care.
So
Night
good.
of the Creeps was another one I remember watching a lot as a
hell
kid.
Yeah. Wow, you watched like all of the classics like when you were growing up. So like your parent, like your mom and your grandma, like holy shit, they really love horror.
All right, so I'm not going to completely blame them.
Okay.
So it was mostly. All right, so I did spend a lot of time with them, but I spent more time with my aunt and uncle because we're similar in age. Like my uncle and aunt, they're like 9, 8 years older than me.
That's like me. My aunt's only 9 years older than me, and she's why I saw like Scream at a young age. Like she was babysitting me and shit, and like I definitely watched a lot of stuff because she was so close in age, but also, and so she was like, "Oh, you can watch it with me." Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I spent so much time with them because they would watch me all the time, like after school or during the weekend. So that's how I got into them. And then, like, my grandma would probably watch something, or my mom would, but I blame mostly my aunt and uncle because I spent so much time with them.
Oh yeah. Like literally in her maid of honor speech, my aunt, who was like my sister, talked about how she showed me Scream and how she showed me scary movies when I was too young. So very much relate to having a younger aunt who was like, you can watch scary movies. You're 5. You'll be fine.
And see, that was me and my brother. I'm 8 years older than my brother, and so like I was doing the same thing for him. I was like, yeah, let's go watch an rated R movie.
Yes. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I feel like you should know. Like, again, I knew what was right and what was wrong. I'm not going out trying to murder and kill people. It's for entertainment, you know? So I wasn't trying to, like, copy those things that I've seen. Now, when I went to school and, asked my friends, did you see this movie? They're like, what are you talking about?
Wait, the same thing happened to me. I got in trouble because I was bragging that I saw Scream, and the principal called my parents and were like, did you know your daughter is watching Scream and she's telling all the kids about it and scaring them?
Yes, I live for that. See?
Everyone else is like, what is wrong with you? And you're like, what?
What?
Anyway.
I love that.
We've talked about like what you watched and what scared you as a kid, but were there any other movies besides the one you're talking about today that really, really got to you when you were younger?
That really got to me? Again, besides this movie, I will say Evil Dead 2.
Okay.
Evil Dead 2
really?
I feel like Evil Dead 2 was like my first horror movie I watched.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Yeah, I know, right?
Wow.
That's from my memory. I think that was like my first horror movie I watched ever.
Wow.
And the reasons why is because I always remember my uncles locking me in the basement, scaring me, saying Henrietta is going to get you. And Henrietta was the little dead-eyed witch in the cellar, fruit cellar. And he used to like just terrify me with that. And I was obsessed with that movie, but I was also very scared of it. And now watching back, the movie as an adult, I'm just like, this is so goofy and silly. I can see how a kid would be scared of it, but it's so silly. And I think I just love it even more because of that.
It has it's very Looney Tunes-esque, right? With like a lot of the violence and whatnot. I feel like that's a good entry point for kids, because it definitely is very kinetic and will keep your attention, but it is still, it is a little creepy if you're I think if you're a kid. Now it's just really silly, but
right. And when I watch it now, I don't think there's much nudity in that. I mean, besides you see the naked corpse dancing around, that's spinning around.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, but outside of that, I don't really remember seeing any nudity. And then the blood looked like it's like Kool-Aid or something. So it just, it was very Looney Tunes and just all of that stuff. And I can see why kids would be attracted to it. And maybe that's why I was attracted to it.
Yeah.
Now, the first movie, that's a different story.
Oh, that is a different story. That is a completely different story. Okay, so transitioning to being an adult, what draws you to the horror genre now as an adult?
Growing up as a kid and just watching those movies I just named, and even watching some of the kid horror like Goosebumps and Erie, Indiana, it's just something that always stuck with me and just super entertaining for me. Like I always latched onto it more than like comedies and action movies and romantic dramas or whatever you want to call them. It's just you have more fun with horror movies, and I feel like the conversations are more fun with them as well. So as an adult, I think, I don't know, like I just find when I find other people that love horror like me, I get very excited, and I made so many friends as an adult just connecting through horror. Even outside of doing YouTube, like before I even started doing that, and I would talk to friends about certain movies, or even my coworkers or wherever. They'll get excited talking about a horror movie with me, and then we'd be talking about it for hours. And I think it's I don't know. I'm not saying it's underrated because we're horror fans, but I would say the general public people, they don't really talk about horror movies as much. And when you do, they probably know the basics like Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers. But then when you start bringing out the other horror movies and stuff, they'd be like, huh, what is that? And then I get excited and I try to introduce them to those horror movies. And like, I don't know if it's your type of thing, but give it a try.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hope to get a new horror fan.
That's always the best when you can snag one. Got another one.
Yes, exactly. Like my best friend, she's not a complete horror head like me. She's been on my channel a couple of times, but when I introduce new movies to her, she gets excited, and she's not into like certain movies. Like she's not into old school movies like that's out in the 70s and 80s. It just doesn't scare her, and she's not really affected by it. But what does affect her is like possession horror. So she's into like The Conjuring and maybe paranormal stuff, like Paranormal Activity, Insidious. She's into things like that. But if I don't want Jason and Halloween or whatever, she's just sitting there laughing at it like, I'm not scared of this shit. So I like to find different things what people like and see what scares them and see what they would be into.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That is so interesting, because I feel like a lot of my friends who aren't horror people will say, oh, I don't like horror movies, but they'll like one aspect of horror movies. I'm like, see, you like horror movies. You like certain horror movies. Like I watched Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Coppola movie, with all of these people who who did not like horror movies, and I was like, "This is a horror movie." They're like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yes, horror movies can look like this," and so it's just it's so fun showing people movies like that. They're like, "Oh, this is a horror movie." I'm like, "Yeah, and it's good." And they're like, "Oh,
yes.
like see, horror is a lot of things," and it is so fun when you get to explain that to people and have them be like, oh, okay. And it's so neat.
Yeah, I love it. Like I even try to tell like some like my family members that, because they think horror is all about like blood and guts and tits and ass, and it's more than that. There's so many different things in the horror genre that you can actually watch and enjoy, and maybe some people might not think it's horror. Us horror fans know what's horror. So we'll get it. So that's why I like to nitpick and ask people questions to see what they like, because maybe I could find something within that genre that's for them.
Well, and that's, I know, we'll move on to something else. Sorry. I had a conversation with someone recently about well, I like thrillers, not horror. And I was like, all right, I'm going to stop you right there. What's the difference? Well, and I was like, I'm going to push on that. Like, what's the difference? And we had a really interesting conversation because people wanted to label things thriller. And I'm like, well, but that to me, it's a horror movie. I'm like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah. And I think it's really interesting when people talk about how they differentiate and like what those words mean to them. So,
yeah, exactly.
It's so cool. Anyway, so back to Bobby, not to my own personal musings about genre definitions.
You're right though, because I remember I was on was it like Tubi or one of those streaming services, and they put, I forgot what movie it was, but they put that movie as like a thriller, and I'm like, no, that movie is horror. What are y'all putting this thriller for? But I don't know. Maybe they're trying to appeal to people. If they don't like horror, maybe they like thriller, and they tricking them that way into watching the movie. I don't know.
Oh yeah, Seven. David Fincher movie Seven is a thriller, not a horror movie. I'm like, have you ever watched that fucking movie? That movie is horrific.
It's horrifying.
But anyway, Bobby. So you talked about having a lot of nightmares as a kid after watching horror movies. Do you still get scared of movies like that now, or do you still feel kind of those after effects at all?
Not really. It's
okay.
rare.
Yeah.
I have nightmares more on real life stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so
fair.
My partner watched a lot of Snap on Oxygen and all of them like true crime stuff.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's what scares me. How I watch horror is how he watched that stuff. And
man.
I get so scared watching it. I'm like, how can you go to bed watching it? He said, how can you go to bed watching people get in their hair and stuff? I'm like, that's different. That's fake. This is real. Okay.
I'm the same way, man.
Exactly. I love true crime and horror, and I love watching that shit. And it is scarier to me. That is still scarier to me than any horror movie. True crime. I had a true crime podcast had me changing the route I walked home from the bus stop when I was like commuting to and from work because I was scared there was someone watching me.
Yeah, it's scary, man.
Anyway,
I'm constantly looking out my windows. I'm checking. I got like little cameras out myself. I'm looking at that every time I hear a weird noise. I don't be playing. Look, they got me paranoid out here. But the horror movies, nah. I'm good.
I agree. Okay, so you mentioned your YouTube channel. How did you get interested in doing YouTube and podcasting and that kind of aspect of content creation? How'd you get into that?
Yeah, so probably in my early 20s, I attempted to start a YouTube channel just reviewing movies in general, not even just horror movies, but just because I love movies. And I played along with that, and then I stopped because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But then when I started doing my YouTube channel, well, when I first started thinking about doing my YouTube channel, before I even came up with Bobby Likes It Spooky, it was just my name, Bobby Torrez.
Title.
I know, right? Return of the Living Dead, thank you. One of my favorite zombie movies, and Trash is one of my favorite characters. And it's a scene where she's with Suicide, the character, and he says something to her, and she's like, I like it, Spooky. And I said, yes, I'm taking it. Putting it in my YouTube channel.
That's great.
But I started because I really love horror, and I see a lot of movie reviews on YouTube, but I didn't really see too many that look like me. Like, I'm a Black queer man, and I don't really see too many Black queer people talking about horror in general, for one. And for two, I wanted to be that person where I can see, like, people look at me and say, oh, I see him doing it, I could do the same thing too, because I love it. And since starting it, I actually got a lot of messages saying, like, yo, I never realized there was another person that looked like me that loved horror as much as I did. And that's why I truly do it, and that makes me feel great, because I don't really care about getting monetized or none of that stuff. Like, that's not really important to me. I do it simply just because I love the genre itself, and I love meeting people through it. Like, I met you guys, I met, Brother Ghoulish, Mike, like so many cool, dope people now that I now consider friends. And I think that's why I truly do this, and it keeps me going. Because there's times when I actually want to stop doing my YouTube because I'm just like, nobody's watching my stuff, nobody cares. Like, other people have other people to watch. Why would they want to hear what I have to say? But then when I get those messages and those little comments, it keeps me going. And then I keep meeting friends and meeting new people that's into the genre, and it just puts a smile on my face and just make me want to keep doing it all the time. So that's why I love doing it. And I'm naturally a creative too. Like I like to work on things and create things. I'm just that person. I used to draw, I used to dance. I always have to work on something. So this also keeps me out of trouble. and and it's a fun thing. And again, I just love meeting the people that I met just by doing this. And as far as podcasting, I never thought about doing podcasting. I listened to everybody. I listened to you guys. I had like my list of podcasters. I said, I ain't doing podcasts. YouTube is good enough for me, right? And then Mike hit me up. He was like, "You would like to be on my guest on the show?" Sure. He's like, "You know what? I like you here." And I'm like, "Yeah." Mm-hmm. And he was like, "So you think about coming back?" I'm like, "Sure." And then he was like, "So, I've been thinking about having a guest, like a permanent co-host or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, sure. Who are you thinking?" And I knew he wanted to ask me, but I wanted to play with his head.
Of course.
So he was just like, "Bobby, like I was going to ask you." I'm just like, "Oh." And he was like, "What do you mean?" Like I'm just like, let's do a test run. I'll be on a couple episodes. We'll see how it go. And if, I like it and it fits well, and then, it's just I feel like if it's natural, then sure. And it turned out great. Obviously I'm still here. I'm a co-host to his show now, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a journey. Still is a journey. And it's different. I'm starting to see this the podcasting side of things, because I'm always so used to YouTube and working with video. And it's pretty similar. It's just I'm working with audio opposed to video.
Yep.
And even though Mike does all the editing and stuff, because he's like, "I already know you got a lot on your plate, like I'll do that part because I asked you one." I'm like, "Oh, thank you, please, thank you. I don't have enough time." But I did help out in a lot of aspects on a lot of things, and I even told him, like, if you need my help for anything, I know how to edit audio, so I'm here for it. So it's been fun doing both. And then Scream Kingz, I'm a part of that too. It's a collective group of us. Every week we talk about a new subject in horror, and we just sitting here scratching each other eyes out, yelling at each other, having final girl debates, and just it's a fun time with that. So I'm staying busy.
Hell yeah, you are.
Yeah.
I gotta say that, as it's one of those things where, I mean, the thing that you said where you didn't see people like you on YouTube, and honestly, like for the longest time, I stayed away from talking about horror because I always had like a preconceived notion of who was the people controlling horror media, and it was like straight white men, right? And so like it wasn't until, I don't know, 2017, 2016 maybe, when I started to realize that no, there's actually a lot more diversity in horror, and there's people talking about it that I never realized. And so it's important that I know and I'm giving you a pep talk right now. I know that sometimes it's really exhausting on like YouTube to like have to do all that stuff, but it's so important to be able, if you have that ability, to be able to do it, because you don't know about that little scared queer kid or, person of color or whatever that doesn't know that they are welcome in the community. And so I think I like what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. It means a lot. And like I said, that's what keeps me going. Like the people have been great. And just to get those messages, like I got one last week. Literally one guy was just like, for Scream Kingz, he was just like, this is my first time seeing a group of gay Black men talking about horror.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. And he was like, I love this. He's like, I see myself. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I want to cry. Like, I don't know. It means a lot. And that's what keeps me going and it keeps me wanting to keep doing this for people, because you never know. Like I might inspire somebody else to do this, and I love that. Like I didn't see that too much for myself. And don't get me wrong, like I have people that don't look like me that I love watching. But, it's different when you have representation, and I always say representation matters. So I want to be that for a lot of people.
Well, especially in like a community that people are I think horror has a very, appropriate reputation of not being an inclusive, welcoming. And I know that we've all had, very accepting experiences in the horror community, but we've also probably all had really shitty experiences in the community. So it's like always nice to have creators and people out there who are at least like little bastions of hope and like light amongst a sea of people who can be pretty fucking gross. Because as much as cool people are, it can be difficult out there to find like the good pockets of groups of people like us who love horror, because it can be so gatekeepy. So it's always so amazing that, you know, Bobby, you having your podcast and your work, just, you know, hey guys, not all horror is so rude and gross.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of nasty people like out there. I try my best not to communicate with them. You know, I simply just don't communicate with them. Or if I happen to follow them just because I didn't know and I happen to see something, I just unfollow them or block them, because I choose, like a lot of people say I hate like social media because there's nothing but this and that. But your social media is what you make it. It's like you follow people. You can easily unfollow them and block them. And my social media never was how it is now. Like a long time ago, it was just me talking about Rihanna at the VMAs, like most of the time. You know what I mean? And then when I got more into like my channel and started meeting different people, and I wanted to make my, you know, my Twitter a certain thing, and even my Instagram, I made it just as that, you know, and I weed out all the negative shit. And I enjoy it. So anything negative thing I see that I don't like, I kind of just mute it, block it, unfollow. From my mental, I mean,
everyone follow Bobby's example. Don't engage. Don't think about it. Just unfollow, block, get it off of your timeline forever. There's no point in engaging. I should take that advice more often.
Me too. But also, we need a new Rihanna album now that you mentioned her.
Listen,
I want a new Rihanna album.
She just that stupid shit with Fenty with Johnny Depp, though, and that makes me sad. That makes me sad.
That rubbed me the wrong way, but look, when she dropped music, I'm still there.
That's true. That's fair.
I mean, her albums are just fire, every single one. Like, anyway, this is not a Rihanna podcast, but I was just thinking about her because, like, I think she's performing at the halftime show, right? Isn't she doing that?
Yeah, because wasn't everyone like, it's going to just be a Fenty fashion show? And I was like, that's fine with me. Like, that's more fun.
She released a song recently for the Black Panther 2 soundtrack, and at first I didn't care for it.
I'm not a really big fan of it, honestly, unfortunately.
Yeah, but did you see the movie?
No, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't had a chance to.
Okay, so when you see the movie, because I wasn't a big fan of it either, but how the song plays within the movie, I like it much more. Yeah.
Okay.
It makes a lot of sense.
Is the second Black Panther good?
It's good. It's very it's not like the first. I will say that it's not like the first because, you know, unfortunately we lost Chadwick.
Yeah.
So they're focused on obviously, you know, losing T'Challa and things like that. So I mean, I would say it's not worth the 2.5 hours. I didn't have the same excitement like I did the first one, but what I will say is I feel like it is good. Not better than the first one, but it is a good movie.
Right.
I just don't have the same excitement, and I don't think a lot of people have the same excitement just because of...
It's hard, right?
It's hard.
Because of losing
But I will say, everybody did such a great job. Angela Bassett, I think it's Letitia Wright who plays Shuri. The actress who played, like, everybody just did such a great job. And then that the new anti-hero, whoever,
Namor is oh my god,
the Mayan indigenous. Oh, anyway, sorry to make this like talking about other movies, but I was like,
he gives me the vapors.
Look, I'm just like, when you watch some, I'm just like, okay. Me and my boyfriend looked at each other. He was like, he's fucking hot. Like, I know, right?
On that note, Bobby, what other movie about an aquatic hottie did you bring with you today to talk about?
Just home for now. I know a lot of people's all about Aquaman and stuff right now, but right now, we all on home.
But yeah, Bobby, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Okay, so I bought the It miniseries 1990.
Oh boy.
Yes.
So for those of you unfamiliar, the miniseries starts in 1960 where 7 preteen outcasts fight an evil demon who poses as a child-killing clown. 30 years later, they reunite to stop the demon once and for all when it returns to their hometown of Derry.
All right. So, Bobby, take us back to, I think you said 5 years old. Take us back to when you saw this movie. How did you see this movie? Why did you see this movie? And give us your Scarred for Life story. We want to hear it all.
Okay. So, When you hit me up and asked me about this a while ago, I knew exactly what movie I wanted to talk about because this movie, again, super traumatizing. That's why I'm here. So I remember watching this, and I blame my mama because I remember I didn't watch it as it was airing on TV, but I think my
Okay.
mom had rented from the same
Mm.
video store, and it was like a double
That
VHS
double
set.
VHS,
Yeah,
yes.
the double
Mhm.
VHS.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it was that.
Days.
And she ran it, and I was watching it with her, and I would just say, like, it just got me the hell out of here. Tim Curry in that moment, first of all, the movie starts off with, the little girl on the tricycle, and he gets her out of here. And just Tim Curry's facial expressions itself was terrifying for me. But then when we get to that moment with Georgie in the sewer, I was like, you know what? I can't. I don't think I ever watched the second part of this movie. I watched the first one, and I didn't finish the second one for a
Oh.
very long time because that's how fucked up this movie had me. Like, I never knew, and I think that's why it was much scarier for me because I didn't know how it ended. I didn't know how Pennywise died. So in my head, I'm thinking like he's still around. This is happening, and I never watched that second movie, and that's my fault. Because I didn't want to, and I probably watched it maybe a few years afterwards with my cousins. I think we were having like a little sleepover or something, and we ended up watching the second part, and it was just as scary, but it became a little less scary when we found out that Pennywise become this huge alien spider, and I'm just like, I really, this was it? Okay, sure. I was scared of this damn spider the whole entire time. Whatever.
So did you watch the entire first episode, or did you like turn it off after?
I watched I watched
watched
the
all
whole
of it?
entire first one, but the second one I just never. That was it. After that first VHS tape was done, I didn't watch that second one with my mom, and I think she knew I was scared because I would have nightmares because of Pennywise. Like when I would go to
Aw.
bed, like I would mention you guys, I would have these reoccurring nightmares of Pennywise to the point where I would wake up in the middle of the night or try to sneak downstairs and put on the TV, and my mom like go to bed, and he really like just scared me. And even in my basement, like my mom had a finished basement, and there was this picture when we moved in the house. It was like these three clowns, and they were very like animated. One was like on a jungle gym, another one was like on a bike, and I never wanted to walk past that to go into the laundry room because of Pennywise. And I'm thinking it's going to come alive because obviously in the one scene in this movie, you remember when they were looking through the book and the black and white photo turned into a hole. I thought that was going to happen to me.
Oh no!
With the clowns in the photo. So
Oh,
Pennywise,
no.
just he terrified me.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. I'm curious to hear your and we'll get to this in a minute. I'm curious to hear your thoughts watching this as an adult, because I think that this version of Pennywise is probably more traumatizing if you're a kid, because he is very like Bozo the Clown, very traditional clown that you would see at birthday parties or that you would see represented on television. And there's like, I know that when they created him, they wanted him to be very friendly looking on the surface, because I mean, how else are you going to get kids to come to you if you're not, if you can't be like this traumatizing, horrifying visage if you want to be able to lure kids in to kill him or whatnot. So I'm curious about that aspect of it as a kid versus now, because we have, of course, now two versions of Pennywise the Clown, and I have my own personal opinion on which one is scarier. But I'm curious, does Pennywise still scare you, this version of him as an adult? Or
yes,
okay,
yes. I mean, it's not as terrifying like how it was when I was a kid, obviously, because I'm a 34-year-old man now, and I'm just like, I don't got time to be scared of no damn clown. There's worse things to be scared about. But watching this movie, it took me back to those times when I was, a kid and being scared in my room. Every time I watch it, it brings those memories back. And like I said, Tim Curry, again, just how he sounds, his voice, the way he changes.
Hiya, Georgie.
He does appear from... don't do that!
Incredible. Bobby just became 5 years old again. He's been transported back in time.
That was great. And, Bill Skarsgård did the same thing, but it just didn't hit the same.
Okay.
But for some reason, you sound like the Pennywise version, so that just got me a little bit. I mean, Tim Curry version, I'm sorry.
I forgot that he has, like, a Jersey accent in this. Like, it sounds Jersey, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, he sounds like he's like a Jersey clown that's been, like, chain smoking for years.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he has been smoking a lot on the set of this movie. Like,
this is the fucking picture of him smoking cigarettes in the Pennywise car. Oh, it's my favorite thing. That's all I could think about in these parts. I was just thinking of him smoking a cigarette. Like, you sound like exactly like the photos look like. So, I mean, incredible.
And
love
that's
that.
It's scary,
So when you finally did watch the second part at a sleepover, is that what you said? Did that scare you as much as when you first saw it?
Not really. I mean, and it's funny because when I was watching the movie again to prepare for this, I noticed that we got a little bit more Pennywise in the second half when there were adults more than the first part, I believe. And I think it was more so he's not really going after kids in the second one, where in the first one you see that was the main thing. This time you got the group of kids, the Losers Club grown now, they're adults. And you just have Pennywise warning them, like, get the hell out of here before I kill you all. And he's kind of like taunting them at the same time as well. So I found it a little bit more funny because there was some moments when there were adults where it had me laughing, where, like, for instance, when Richie was in the library and he's on the Pennywise is like making all this noise and playing with the little trolley thing and saying horrible jokes, and that really had me cracking up. And I think as a kid watching that part too had me laughing, especially since I was with friends and family. It made it a little bit less scary, So that first part is just a little bit more scarier to me than the second half. But again, Tim Curry overall as this clown is terrifying.
So it's very funny that you talk about how you only saw the first half, because I have the inverse story about how I first saw this movie. So
okay.
I only remembered this after I watched it yesterday, like revisiting it, because I was like, oh, I've seen this whole thing, like I know all of this. Realizing that I'd only watch actually the second half, because so for Halloween, I talked about this a couple of times in the podcast, but when I was in high school, Halloween was, instead of trick-or-treating, it was now like movie marathon time. So we would go to my friend's house after going to Blockbuster or raiding our parents' like stashes of DVDs and VHSs and watch horror movies. And we wanted to watch It. And this was before the new one came out, so there was only one It. And my friend was like, oh, but it's 3 hours long. And us being like 15, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm not watching a 3 hour long movie. And she was like, yeah, the first part's boring anyway, so let's just watch the second part. So I didn't, and this is like, and like, I hadn't read it or any, like, I didn't know anything. I knew what it was, but like, I didn't know who the characters were. So we were like, okay, we'll just watch the second part. Because the first part, I'm watching it, I was like, I don't remember any of this. And then all of a sudden, this stuff with Richie started happening in the library, and I was like, oh, it's because we only watched part 2 because my friend said that part 1 was boring and not worth watching. So I only saw part 2. And like, wow. So I remembered that yesterday. That's how I saw this movie for the first time, because
okay,
it was all half
that's
of it.
Great.
Yeah.
So what did you think about the first half then? Like, now watching it?
It's weird watching it after also having seen the new ones, because I'm also now comparing the new ones to that in my head. But I think it's a very interesting, to me, the fascination with it in general. And I understand why, because I feel like scary clowns are like a universal thing, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on in this movie and in the story about like small town America and trauma and all this stuff. I just don't think the kids were as good as the new kids, and I feel bad saying that, but the acting is not. It feels very 90s miniseries is what it is. Okay. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely feels like a very big product of its time kind of scenario.
Right.
To me. I will say, I do like the approach that the miniseries takes in having the adults and kids mixed together the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the book does this.
Yes.
I haven't read the full book. I have not read the full. I've tried twice. it's Terry's favorite book. He'll talk about it. I haven't been able to read it, but I do know from the attempts I've made to read it, Bobby shaking his head, that they mix the kids and the adults, and I like that better than keeping them separate like they did with the new versions. I like having the past and the present more intertwined. I did like that a lot better.
Yeah.
And watching it this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, when I first seen the remake, I was just like, oh, like, we're not going to get the adults until, like, later, on or whatever. And I was kind of happy with the choices that they made. But I do agree with the intertwine with the adults back and forth.
And I think it's like always on the second part that I didn't realize it was intertwined in the first part. So when I saw the new part 1, I thought it was this. I didn't realize that it had changed until I saw people talking about it, and I was like, oh, a lot of things are making sense now in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Look, I also read this big ass book, how thick this is, and all right, so I never read the book ever, okay? And when the newer version came out in 2017, right? I said, let me just reread this, go and, visit it again and just see how it is. And, yeah, I wish I haven't. All right, so I did all of it, and then I bought the audios, because sometimes, all right, so I read this at home, and then like on my way commuting to work and from work, I got the audio version so I can go back and forth. But the amount of times the N-word is being used in this book,
Okay,
and then also just not even just racism, but just a whole bunch of craziness happening here. I'm like, Stephen King, what is wrong with you, man? Like, what is going on? Yeah, but the man is a genius, but at the same time, it's just like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to reread this again. I'll just watch the movies and be happy.
I was talking to Terry. What's so funny? I was talking to Terry about this, because so Terry will chime in, but Terry, actually, you go first. You go first about this.
I have read this book maybe half a dozen times.
What?
It's
I know, he told me that. It's like, I couldn't even I've tried to read it 2 times, and I have not gotten to 200 pages when I've tried to read it.
Wow.
It's not only like it's probably it is my favorite Stephen King book, but it's also one of my favorite novels, period. Weirdness and all, like, don't get me started on the whole, like, people keep referring it to a child orgy, but it is a gangbang, because they aren't having sex with each other. They're all having sex with Beverly. Like, that is weird. There is some weird shit in here. I will not deny that. There is a lot of homophobic, racist shit in here, but it all, in my opinion, serves a point. And this book just, I don't know, there's something about this book that I just taps into me. I was an English major. I love reading novels. The bigger the novel, the better. This one is one that I remember. Well, okay, so first I remember, before I even read the book, I remember seeing the VHS of it at, the double VHS, in that white box with Pennywise on the front and this like alien claw reaching over, right? And that was such a visceral image that I remember seeing over and over and over again in the library, or not the library, the Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or whatever. And my parents wouldn't let me watch it. They wouldn't let me. There was like, at that time, it was at the stage where my parents started becoming more conservative with what I was able to consume in like movies and whatnot. But they allowed me to read, and I had found Stephen King. And then I remember finally getting the book, and being like, oh, this book is huge. And just like sitting through it and reading that book, and just, it captured my imagination. It like was probably one of the first times that I'd ever seen queer people in a book. And some of the representation is very negative. Like, Henry Bowers is a closeted queer person who is taking out his internalized homophobia out on other people. Like, there's a lot of internal struggle going on in this book, but I think that it is so fascinating, because this book, when you start to like peel it back in the layers of what Stephen King is trying to do, he's trying to explain how fucked up America is and how much adults are willing to just look the other way. And it's like, kids see it, kids are the victims of it. And yet we have adults that are just like, and that's one thing I will say this miniseries does incredibly well. There's that one moment where Beverly is talking about being accosted on the street by Henry and his gang. And there's this guy and she's like, it's Mr. I think Ross was his name. I can't remember exactly what his name was that she mentioned, but he's like,
he turns the other way.
He turns the other way and walks off. And I'm like, that right there is one of the nuggets that I think Stephen King is exploring by using Derry as like a microcosm to explore the macrocosm problems of racism and homophobia and abuse and all this kind of continual trauma that is happening in America that no one wants to really discuss, and about how like the cycles keep happening, because it's very pointed that Pennywise keeps coming back every generation, as if like there is like a new trauma that's going to happen that's going to fuck people up over this generation, and he just kind of represents that continual churn of just evil that is happening in this country. And so like, I don't know, I find this book incredibly fascinating, problematic in spots, but incredibly fascinating. So like, I've read it so many times. I love it. It's been a while. I read it right before Chapter 1 came out, the movie. And that was the last time I've read it since then, because it is a time commitment. I will admit that.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I just
totally. It was a journey when I read it. I mean, I'm happy that I did. And it was something like I've never read before. And like I said, will I read it again? Probably not anytime soon. But, you know, never say never. Maybe, 25 years from now when I'm a lot older, probably. Who knows? Maybe every 27 years.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I don't even, there's so much to like that you could dig into with this miniseries in the book. But there's one thing that surprised me right off, and that was I forgot that Adrian Mellon is not in this adaptation of it.
Version,
the gay man that is brutally murdered in both the book and in Chapter 2, and they replace it with like a scene of that little girl that you mentioned. What is her name? Like Lori Ann or something like that ends up getting abducted by it. And I think the one thing that the miniseries I think does really well is grounds it in like just kids, like it is kids trauma that is happening, because like in the book and in Chapter 2, like Adrian is not a kid. He's I think like 18, 20, somewhere around that, like that age range. And so like, I think that this miniseries, it feels like it's made more for kids in a weird way. I feel weird saying that, but because it is like kinder trauma and it is like kids in danger there, and the fact that it was airing on like ABC at, evening, like it feels more, I don't know, it feels more like it was made for a family audience in a way, if that makes sense.
Well, especially which is so interesting because they still can say the N-word on ABC Family and do some like pretty fucked up stuff that like you shouldn't be able to do on ABC Family in the 90s. Like, it's very interesting what is prioritized and what isn't prioritized. Like, what is seen as acceptable and what is not in the 90s on TV like that is fascinating to me. Especially in like using hate speech and slurs and things like that, and like being able to show those kinds of things, and choosing not to show the hate crime at the beginning with Adrian Mellon. It's just a very fascinating look at priorities. That honestly, like, I know that we had Adrian Mellon in the part 2, but we can talk about how that was handled for a long time as well, and how but also I feel like it speaks to how they handle queerness with the queer characters as well. And like, it is very sanitized, Terry, which I think is something you wrote in our notes, is that this does feel very sanitized. And I do kind of agree that while it is really scary, it does feel like it's more meant for it could be meant for kids to watch, because while there are absolutely horrifying moments with Pennywise, he's not in it that much if you really think about it. Like, he's not, you don't see him a ton. And the violence that I remember reading at the beginning of I read the beginning of the book. It's just so violent with the way Georgie's arm is ripped off and everything like that. But in the miniseries, it's pretty sanitized. Like, it's not very violent. It's not. I mean, again, scary clowns will do it all the time. But again, like, it is very kind of watered down from what I think I thought it was.
Which I get, because it was on, TV, where they have to get those things out. It wasn't on cable television. So I understand that.
Yeah.
And I remember Tim Curry saying something about, like, is not meant for kids. But when you watch it, it does seem that way because, it's very kid driven. You're following these group of kids and, their problems, not just what's going on with the clan, but also their personal struggles and things like that, being bullied and, abusive parents, things like that. But I think being as though it's on TV and it is sanitized, I think for me, it made it a little bit more scarier because I'm a fan of like the unknown. Sometimes less is more. And with me, I think that's what did it, especially being young. Like me just seeing Tim Curry play Pennywise the way he did was just scary enough for me. Like I didn't have to see, I mean, I don't know, because Bill Skarsgård, version, I was grown watching that. So I don't know how it would be as a kid to watch that. Probably 10 times scarier. But I think Tim Curry did a great job, just the way he looked, the way he talked, the way he changed his voice, the way he was animated. And it's something scary about his performance for me. And I think that would scare any kid, honestly. Like, he seems friendly, but when his voice starts changing, then all of a sudden his eye colors change and he get the razor sharp teeth and things like just like, what the hell? And it's the aftermath too. Again, with the little girl in the beginning, you didn't see what he did to her, but all you just see was the bike flipped over
and the mom's reaction.
Yeah,
exactly. And at least it's like theater of the mind. You have to play in your head what happened to her. All they said was, I think she was mutilated or something, and that was it. And you don't know exactly how mutilated she was, but it's left to the imagination. Same thing with Georgie. Even though in the book is read what happened to him, but in this the miniseries, you just see him scream and then it cuts. In the newer version, you actually see Pennywise take a chop and rip the arm off.
He's
Georgie
crawling as his arm is gushing blood.
Yeah. I was like, what? Like, that was insane. So I can't imagine being a kid watching that. That would probably traumatize me. My only problem, though, is because I'm older, is that there's a lot of CGI in the new one that takes me out of it.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I'm so used to, like, old school shit and practical effects. So, sometimes when I was watching it, especially after the first one, I said, all right, the second one is going to get better. They made so much more money. Maybe they're going to calm down on the CGI, and they made it was worse than the second one.
It was worse.
That is one of my big complaints about the movies is the amount of CG and the kind of cartoony makeup job they did. Like, even like the transient person that is like plague ridden and whatnot, he just, even though a lot of that is prosthetics, it looks cartoony. And so there's like a definite divide in that movie where it's like, even when it's not CG, it still has this like feel of CG because it feels not of this world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And maybe that's what they were going for, but I don't know. It just made it a little less scary for me.
Same. But okay, but I think you're kind of tapping into something that I was thinking as I was watching this movie, because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I think this movie is a little boring watching as an adult.
I can see that.
I'm going to be honest. I was a little bored through part of it. I thought it was wild that this movie is 3 hours and 7 minutes long, and Chapter 2 is 2 hours and 45 minutes long. But I would much rather watch it Chapter 2. In terms of like, I feel bad saying that because I know this miniseries is near and dear to a lot of people, particularly of specific age that either, watched it on the VHS tapes or watched it live or whatever. I get that this has like a huge nostalgic feel to it. It drags.
It's pretty long. Yeah.
And it's a little too sanitized for me because but again, if I were like the right age watching this, like if I were you, or if I was like in that kind of young child age and I saw this, I would be fucking traumatized. Absolutely. Yeah. But this miniseries does leave a lot to the imagination. And I think particularly, and that's why, again, I think that this movie is probably captured a lot of kids because it does require a lot of imagination on the person. Whereas like now as I'm an adult and I've seen so many horror movies, it's like, I need a little bit more than what you're giving me. But like as a kid, if I were seeing this, I think it would have traumatized me.
Oh yeah. It's definitely a nostalgia thing, because again, if I was to watch this for the first time at the age I am, I definitely would be bored as hell. Like, why do people find this the hell scary? But like you said, I watched this as a kid, so there's that. If I didn't, then it would be different.
And it's so interesting because even it coming out in 2017 and when Chapter 2 came out, people loved it. Like, but I think it was both nostalgia, but a huge new audience of young horror fans found it too, which I think is so cool because, like, again, I feel like how old I am, it was like I watched the original It too late, and then I also saw the new one too late to be like the target audience for like loving it. But goddamn, if like on Tumblr and stuff, like people went ape shit for Pennywise and for It. So it's really interesting to see how it has captured like audiences of horror fans, like the younger audiences, because I think because it is a movie and a story that's not afraid of putting kids in peril, I think it does really stand out. And a movie that put kids in peril that is really popular, because we have a lot of like horror movies that put kids in peril, but they're not like big blockbuster mainstream releases. But this one isn't. I mean, fucking It 1 and 2, the new ones are like the highest grossing movies ever or close to that, which is so cool. But it is really interesting about how younger audiences gravitate towards it, both as like almost like a dare, but also like I can see myself as a young kid in this scenario way better than if I was watching like another kind of horror movie geared towards adults. It's really interesting. And
I think we all secretly like clowns in a weird way, like, because Pennywise is an animated being, you know? Yeah. So I can see how people that probably didn't even see the OG watch the new one and can be attracted to it, because it's like you got this clown, it's demonic in some way, we don't know exactly what it is. And again, like you said, it's putting the movie's putting kids in peril and just like they're in danger, and you know that's something scary because we don't get too much of that, because when you put kids in danger, sometimes that can be a problem to most people, because it's like, oh, you gotta leave the kids alone. Where me, I'm like, no, all the kids can fucking
I'm like, no,
especially the ones that deserve it. Get rid of them. But
beat them.
I think especially since Stranger Things been out, when the newer one came out, and everybody in the 80s was such a huge thing. I think that's why they even with the newer one, they didn't set it like in the 1950s. They pushed it to like the 70s or something like that. I don't remember. So they even pushed it back a little bit, and I think kids were hot then, with kids being on their bikes in the 80s and stuff. So it was already capturing that feel of that audience already. So I think that's why it probably was another huge success because of that reason. And again, Bill Skarsgård, like those promos, man. When I seen that trailer the first time of Bill Skarsgård in that makeup and just seeing him act as Pennywise, I was just like, this is going to be good. This is going to be great. And I actually enjoy it. I will watch the newer versions more than the OG, obviously, because I think it's faster and it is a little bit more entertaining. But the scarier Pennywise to me will always be Tim Curry. Always. Yeah,
I was actually talking about this earlier with someone else. I was like, oh yeah, I rewatched the new or the older It, and how it's like I like Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise better performance-wise, but I do think because it's a lot of CGI with this Pennywise, but I also think that it's the CGI, but also it's so campy. And I feel like Pennywise is like an inherently kind of campy character, but Tim Curry plays it a little bit more straight. It's not as like kind of like, hello, kind of silly, like you want to laugh a little bit. Like it is kind of like, oh, you're a creepy old man in a clown costume. Like nothing about you says I mean you no harm. And then he quickly transforms. I think there's something about that kind of, there's less of a distance from Pennywise in the miniseries than there is, I feel, in the newer ones.
Let's be honest, a kid would be more willing to take a balloon from Tim Curry's Pennywise than from the Pennywise in the new It. Like, that Pennywise is like, you ain't luring any kids with that outfit. That shit is fucked up, sir.
Definitely not.
Your eye,
your
you're
head.
able to like...
Like, you don't have a human-shaped head. Like, your forehead is so
Sir,
big.
Oh, huge.
there is no way I'm coming into the sewer with you. But if Tim
First of all, I'm
Curry
not coming in
can,
the sewer with anybody.
Yeah,
I don't care if it's not even a clown. Why are you down
I
there?
mean, if it was like really Bill Skarsgård out of makeup, I would probably follow him.
No,
I
I wouldn't. I love Bill Skarsgård, but he's a little creep. He's a little creepy. He's a little creepy dude with his big eyes. Like, he'd be like, "Yeah, I found something cool down here. Come show me. I'll show you. They'll show you a dead thing and then kill you." Like,
he's so
I just
cute.
look.
I think we're gonna have this conversation when we talk about Barbarian, but I would definitely
Oh,
follow.
gosh.
Look,
I would follow him.
I love a creepy boy who kind of looks like he might be scary, but it's actually very sweet.
He's
That does
so
not mean if Bill Skarsgård was in a sewer, I would follow him, because
Oh,
even
I would be like, I'm
even
too fat to
I-
get into the sewer, but I'm going to try anyway. That is what is going to happen.
Seriously, I can do it. I can do it.
I can do it. Let me in.
Eric Andre gift, let me in.
I'm telling you. I got to live my life, okay? I am crawling into that sewer. I don't care how.
Okay.
I'm finding a way into that fucking sewer.
I'm here for it.
And we can do it next to the
Terry-
rats and feces, if
Terry-
that's what needs
Oh
to
my
be
gosh,
done.
no.
Float too. You go float. You're fucking gross. I love
Don't
you.
do
Yeah,
it, Terry.
that's fine.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
It's all fake. It's Pennywise posing as Bill Skarsgård to get you in the sewer.
I would do it. Take me now. I'm ready to see the dead
At least
lights.
you'd be happy. You'd be in the dead lights thinking you're looking at Bill Skarsgård's abs.
No.
Mm.
Oh, yeah, right?
What a way to go.
I mean, I know this is off subject, but I feel like he was the best part in Barbarian for me. I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into that movie, but I seen the movie mostly because of him. I will say that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, but that kind of leads into like I do want to talk about the queerness. I want to talk about queerness because here we have the book, which tackles queerness in different ways. We have the miniseries and we have the movies, and each one has queerness as subtext or text, but they do things differently. And what I find is so interesting is one of the things that was like the impetus for Stephen King writing it in the first place. Like there's a couple different disparate things that he was trying to work through. Like he wanted to tell an adaptation of Three Billy Goats Gruff and talk about like the thing under the bridge. He had found out that there's like a massive sewer system under Bangor, Maine that like was made haphazardly and no one has like a good map of it because it was just sort of like built over time and it's massive apparently under there. So there's that going on. But then there was another story that he had seen in a newspaper, and it was about the time here's a quote. There had been a story in the newspaper about the time we decided to move up here about a young man who came out of the Jaguar Tavern during the Bangor Fair. He was gay and some guys got to joking with him. Then the joking got out of hand and they threw him over a bridge and killed him. And I thought, that's what I want to write about. Tabby didn't really want to come here, but eventually we did. And so he has this nugget of a story about this guy, this poor gay person that was thrown over a bridge. And that sort of like became like an impetus to kind of dig into the sort of like horrors of small town Americana and America as a whole. And so there's a lot in the book about internalized homophobia. We kind of talked a little bit earlier about Henry Bowers, and there's like a scene in the book where he and one of his gang end up like kind of fucking. And it's
I think
like
it was Patrick Hofstadter.
Yes.
I think it was Patrick Hofstadter, yeah.
And there's like that aspect of it. And there's like this undertone of queerness that is throughout that book. And so I was really curious revisiting the miniseries to see what, if any, queerness was in here. And we kind of get it in Eddie. Eddie is definitely like queer coded in this adaptation, I would say.
Being queer coded means living with your mom and being a virgin, which is so right.
1990s, man.
Like it's just so it's not funny. I say that as in like a frustrated kind of way of just like really was like I had a hard time keeping track of who was who watching this. By the way, just because like they all look the same and I just couldn't keep track. But I was like, wait. You're making the gay character live with his naggy mother, and then also be a virgin and tell everyone. It's like, I know it's the 90s, but it's just so laughably bad watching it now. It's just like, well, I shouldn't be surprised, but it's pretty egregious for the 90s for that to be the queer coding.
Yeah.
And he's got glasses and he's skinny. Like,
He's a little fey. I mean,
like it's like such like, but you know what I mean? Like, that's how people saw queerness, I feel like, too. Like a little, like, twink, basically. Like,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Eddie's a little twink in this movie. I'm sorry. You look at him. Come on. Look at that man that told me you think he's a twink.
He was adorable to me.
He is adorable.
I'm not saying it as an insult, but he definitely is just like he looks like a sick Victorian boy.
Blame his mama.
I will blame his mama. Anyway. Not to derail from the queerness conversation, I just like was thinking a lot about that, like those very specific choices for the queer coding of the character.
So in the second part, because I caught on to it when I was watching it this time around, when he got the call from Mike and when he was finally leaving, was that supposed to be his partner that was in the car with him? And when he got on the train, he was like saying goodbye or something, because I was just like, all right, like it was very quick, but he literally watched them all go all the way down.
So,
so I was just like, okay, is that supposed?
I got that vibe too. I got like a kind of like a, this is his gentleman cult, whatever the fuck, and like, but they don't go into it. But that's the vibe I got from that. Again, us queers always digging for subtext where we can find it. But like, I think they do set it up that way, like very quickly. But that's how I kind of saw it too. Like, it's his boyfriend or partner.
Yeah.
Someone who means more to him than just like a business person.
Yeah.
With Richie, right? Richie, that one, right?
Well, no, it's like right before Richie, like before he got to meet up with the friends, and he got a ride with, I guess, his business partner, and he led him to the train. And his friend, I don't know who he was, but he literally watched him go all the way down, like when he was on the train. And I'm just like, well, if it's a friend, I was like, all right, bye, see you next time, and then walk away. He literally, it was like this weird connection as the train was going by.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They portrayed it as something more, but it was a very quick moment. There's not a lot of attention given to it. But Bobby, it stood out to me too of like, this is definitely someone who has importance in his life, but they're not going to say why, because it's the 1990 ABC Family miniseries.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it kind of jumped out at me too, because I was thinking, okay, so he says, Eddie says that, he's a virgin and he's not had any romantic, and I'm like, well, let's be honest, this is right smack dab in the middle of the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of gay people were afraid to have sex at that time. Like, and if you're closeted and forced in that aspect of it, like I don't know, there's something there's no nuance in this portrayal. Let's be clear on that aspect of it. But like, I don't know, there's something I have a hard time with some of this aspect of queerness in both this and in the remake, because I don't know, there's a lot that can be said about the bury your gays trope and about, finding emotional relief in the death of queer people, because, Eddie is the one in the group that dies. He's in both adaptations. And then in chapter 2, we have Richie agonizing over the death of someone that he apparently loved in a more than platonic way. And so like, it's really hard to... That is honestly my biggest complaint about it. Chapter 2, the new It in particular, is the way that they sort of weaponize queer trauma without really any nuance to it. Whereas in this one, it almost is like they're just going to kind of whitewash it and just kind of not discuss sex at all, because there's not a whole lot of sexual content in this ABC series. And I realize it's for ABC, but also you say the N-word. I'm like, where is this?
How's that? Yeah. And I wonder, like, did they actually say the N-word on the broadcast and they just maybe like cut it, and then this version we're seeing now is only available on VHS or streaming? Or maybe they actually did say it. I don't remember. I never seen the actual broadcast. I remember just watching the VHS, so I'm not too sure if that was the case. But if that was the case, it doesn't make any sense, because why would that be allowed? Because that's still like a slur. Like, you don't, you can't say that. But I mean, early 90s, things were allowed that's not allowed today.
Oh, absolutely. When we rewatched Monster Squad recently, the amount of times they say they call someone a fag in that, I'm like, and that was a PG-13 movie. I'm like, that shit wouldn't fly in a PG-13 movie today.
Oh, hell no. Hells no. I also had a problem with the portrayal, not of Mike of this version, but a little bit on the newer one, especially on that first half, because they gave all of most of Mike's.
Yes!
You know what I mean?
I do.
What he was supposed to be, pretty much his knowledge on Derry, what was going on to,
they gave it to Ben.
I was like,
yes!
why?
Okay, I was trying to think about that. I'm like, I'm sorry. Wait, okay, thank you.
That's one thing I was happy to see in the miniseries.
Yeah.
Is that he had more of he was more of a character. He's not a character in the new movies at all.
No.
Yeah, that kind of like pissed me off. So I was like, that's one thing they got a little right with the miniseries, that they focus a lot more on Mike, besides when he gets into the hospital. But yeah, I was upset about that part in the newer one.
One other thing that this is taking it in a silly direction, but one of the things that really upset me in this movie was Bill's ponytail.
Yes.
When he turns around and reveals the ponytail, it was a jump scare. I yelled. I was like, I'm sorry. What is this?
What is going on? I wanted to cut it off so bad.
Same. Being younger, I didn't really care. I'm just like, whatever. I'm just watching the movie. I'm here to be scared. But watching as an adult, now I'm like, why?
What is up with that hair?
What is up with it, man?
90s writer
Whose
ponytail.
choice was this?
Whose choice
was this?
But it was like a mullet ponytail, because you couldn't tell in the front, and then on the
was
back.
It real?
I don't know. Was
that like just a decision that they decided to give this character? Like,
all the cool kids have these, right? No.
And also, speaking of hair, and I think you mentioned this, Mary Beth, in our notes, Beverly doesn't have red hair.
Beverly doesn't have red hair. When he was like January Embers, I was like, this bitch's hair is not red.
How are you going to write this poem about someone with not red hair?
It's just like dumb. It's like dumb things like that on top of it's like. It's so fascinating. But I had a quick question about the queerness, because was Richie queer in the book?
So the book doesn't...
Wasn't it alluding that he was?
There's definitely like allusions to queerness that like Richie kind of does kissy faces with Eddie all the time and calls him cute. And there's a little bit of stuff that comes across. It's not as I wouldn't say it's as really pronounced as maybe It Chapter 2 kind of digs into, but it is there. It's just I think it's much more coded.
Okay, because it's not really in the miniseries, is it?
Eddie.
No.
Okay, because I was trying to juggle. I was like, I'm sorry. Where is the source of the queerness for some of this? I was trying to keep my head straight, because again, like, I love Stephen King. I grew up reading Stephen King, but reading him as an adult is a little bit harder now for a lot of reasons, because I think he's a good writer, but I also think he's got a lot of weird hang-ups about lots of people. And so I'm always curious, like, what came first with it, because it all just seems very different across the adaptations, and like how King wrote it and how that's interpreted by other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's true. It is very fascinating.
No shame against Stephen King, everybody. I just think that he's got some weird opinions. That's all I gotta say.
I mean,
opinions. He just like weird. He had some weird hang-ups in like the 80s when he was doing a lot of coke. There was a lot of weird shit going on in that man's head. At least back then.
Maybe too much. Maybe too much. But I just want him. Like, I know he's still writing and stuff now. I just don't want him to be doing that in his recent, like his newer work. Like, yes, that was a long time ago you did that, but you should know now not to maybe say the N-word or be homophobic too much in your books and your writing.
Yeah,
because some of it is unnecessary. Some of it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's that thing too when you're reading it and you're like, okay, cool, you're trying to make a point, but at what point are you making the point, or just be like, look, I can do these things in my work and say that I'm working through things. You know what I mean? Like, especially for like a white guy writer who I think in a lot of his work talks a lot about homophobia and racism, and like, again, maybe he's trying to work through some stuff, but at the same time, there's like a weird boundary where you're like, okay, where is it that you're just doing it because you can kind of get away with it.
Exactly.
And I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to say Stephen King has bad intentions, but he was writing in a time where people didn't really think about that or like have a lot of as many critical thoughts and analysis about like maybe you don't need to have racism and homophobia and like misogyny in every one of your books.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Terry. I know you love Stephen King.
No, it's hard because I'll be perfectly honest. Like rereading the chapter on Adrian Mellon in it is like one of the most heartbreaking, but like very empathetic. Like there's an empathy that Stephen King was writing back in like 1986 in terms of a queer person and the trauma that the queer person's going through that kind of reverberates through the rest of the book. And so, yes, I will absolutely 100% say that there's a lot of times where King, whether intentionally or not, relies on homophobia. I was thinking about this recently when I reread, what was it? It was not Mr. Mercedes. I think it was the sequel to Mr. Mercedes, which is a newer book. And the character in the book goes to jail and is raped in jail by men. And his friend on the outside is queer and is kind of almost like a pederast. Like there's like, and those are the only queer representation in your book. And so that I find deeply problematic when the only representations you have is either sexual trauma or someone being a pedophile. Like that is a problem. But there's something about Adrian Mellon's chapter and the way that has ramifications through the rest of the book that I find so deeply empathetic, particularly at the time that it's being written, where I don't think chapter 2 in particular does a good job of reckoning with that. I think he uses it more for a shock than I would say that book does. But that aside, I mean, like I'm just focusing on it. The rest, there's a lot of poor representation of queerness in Stephen King's books, particularly at that time period. Absolutely.
Yeah. I will say I was like, for it chapter 2, when that came out, and when I was hearing that they were going to put Adrian Mellon's, story into it, I was a little excited because I was wondering how they were going to handle it. And when I seen it, I was like, this isn't, and I mean, I get it. It is to make you uncomfortable. But in the way this world is set up right now, it's just like, I don't know if we probably needed it. But I did want it because I thought they were going to do something different, because I'm like, you know what? They changed things up a little bit. They changed the story in general up a little bit. So maybe they'll do something different with this. But it wasn't handled well, in my personal opinion. So I honestly could leave out. And it does rub me the wrong way because, I mean, it's gay bashing. And that's not cool. Not too sure if you guys ever been there. I mean, I've been there before, and it's hard. So even seeing that, like I've seen it with my partner as well, and he thought like somehow, because my boyfriend never seen, I don't think he ever seen the miniseries, and he never read the book. And so when he seen that part in it chapter 2, he was just like, I was hoping that Pennywise would get the bullies or something like that, rather than get the ones that's already being harmed in the text. And I'm just like, no, unfortunately, that's not going to happen here. So, yeah.
It does.
I know that there's like 1,000,010 things we could talk about with it, the miniseries, but do we want to start wrapping up and give us our rating? I know we could talk. Like, there's so many things we could talk about.
This could be like a 4-hour podcast.
This could be But I think we got some cool stuff, but do maybe want to start wrapping up and give it a rating?
Yes, I do want to throw one thing in there, because there's one thing that genuinely disturbed me in this miniseries that I was not expecting, and that was the fortune-telling scene, the fortune cookie scene. Where they open it and there's like a baby chicken like fetus thing that grossed me the fuck out. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I was like, oh, that is the most horrifying thing I've seen in this 3-hour movie. It really affected me.
There was a lot of things that bothered like me. Like even now it's really effective. Like one of the scenes that I really enjoy and that still creeps me out is when Eddie was in the shower and Pennywise came out the damn drain, and just that moment. There was another moment where Stan this was funny to me. When it was that same scene where they were all having a dinner, and then Stan's head was inside the little fridge, and he was beating everybody down. He was getting everybody together.
He was like, "Library is open, bitch."
Right, literally. You thought you was the true librarian here. He was getting everybody together. I was just like, "Yo, he is getting them together." But that was a good scene, and then obviously another creepy scene to me. It's something small, but it's when I believe Henry Bowers, the grown-up version, he was in his room, and Pennywise somehow resurrected his friend and brought him back as like a ghoul or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the way he just slid out from underneath the bed and was talking to him. And I'm just like, oh, that's kind of creepy. So there's some moments in here that does very well with some of the imagery and things like that.
I guess very American Werewolf in London, that part where he comes out from under the bed and talking to him. Like, I got very American Werewolf in London vibes. And I think there's a lot of really cool practical effect stuff going on here. Like, I think when Ben sees his dad and it's actually like the corpse from the water, which is really fucked. Like, that's creepy. That's fucked up. Like, there are so many parts in this that I think really do tap into like trauma and fear and like unresolved things that you both haven't looked at as a kid or an adult. I think that this movie really does a lot of interesting things. I think King does it well in the book from what I've read. And I think this miniseries especially tries to tap into the kind of like the process of forgetting and then re-remembering trauma and kind of being brought back. I think that the miniseries does a really good job in playing with each of their own memories and what memory means to them and what that means in relation to the idea of trauma and like going, because Pennywise, the whole thing is you forget, but I think it also is a good metaphor for things like you forget when you're traumatized as a kid and don't want to bring them up and think about them again, and then you remember them and it all comes rushing back. I think that's something that the miniseries does do well. Better, I think, than the original or the new one, the new ones. And I think it does try. I think in trying to do that, it stays. I think it kind of slows down the pace. But I think it is trying to like play more with that idea of memory and what that means to remember, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I also like how when Mike does call everybody, they kind of go and revert back to their young selves in a way. Like, I believe, what's his name? The main character with the ponytail. Bill.
Ponytail.
Like, he started...
Ponytail.
He started stuttering more, when he haven't done it in a very long time. And it's also interesting to see how Beverly ended up with a person that's abusive just as much as her father was.
Yeah.
And then she kind of got the strength to like stop him and, leave. I mean, and I also felt bad for Stan as well, because like he took his own life because that's something that he did not just want to face again. And that's trigger warning for, that, but it was sad because it's like he's minding his own business. He's happy with his wife, and he gets this call, and he does that thing with his ear that he did when he was young, and it took him back, and he remembered everything, and seeing the deadlights, and seeing Pennywise in his true form, and being nearly killed, and he did not want to revisit that all over again as an adult. So what he did was, he took his own life, and that was his way to get out of it. So that was definitely sad. And I think they handled it the same way in the newer version as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like little stuff like that still, I think is, that works for me, and I enjoy, and still very effective.
Yeah. I will say that as Bill is riding down Main Street with Audra on his bike, which, by the way, Audra, Olivia Hussey.
What's up, girl?
I was like,
she cracks
Queen?
me up because first of all right, so in Black Christmas, it always seemed like she has an attitude when she answers the phone. Hello. And this one, like, it seemed like she had an attitude with Bill the whole entire time. I'm just like, is that her way of acting?
Is that her?
That's what I was thinking too. I'm like, she has an attitude in every role she plays. She just seems angry in every
But what killed me is they're riding down the street, and he's like saying, beat it, beat it, beat it. And I just kept thinking, beat it, come on, Audra, beat it. Like, that is literally what went through my head as he is saying, beat it, Audra, beat it. I was like,
I'm gonna get a clip of that and play Michael Jackson
I'm
in the
telling you.
background as that goes.
Beat it, Audra. Come on, Audra. Beat it. Seriously, I was like, what is happening here?
Yeah, that was very interesting. I mean, I'm happy she came back to herself, but that was very interesting, especially for it to be the final scene in the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, okay. We have talked about so many things with it, and we will have not even scratched the surface, but that's okay because it's a 3-hour-long miniseries.
It is.
But Terry, how many hiya Georgies
Georgie.
do you give it the miniseries?
This is hard for me, man. We didn't even talk about the Party City ending with the spider and the really shitty webs.
I seriously, like, that's not, the climax isn't even, like, I forget about it, because it's just, like, not that good.
I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Alright, so, I mean, there was a spider, I mean, it was a spider version of him in the newer version, Chapter 2 as well, but it was just, like, his big-ass Pennywise head with his legs.
I know, and I was like,
very much the thing.
What is this?
Yeah, I honestly prefer this, this practical effect spider opposed to the newer one, because it just was something about that wasn't right with me. I'm just like, I'm good. And even though I was still disappointed with the spider overall, I think it was still cool, because I think that spider, I was watching a documentary on Screenbox, and they said a lot of cool things. And they said that the spider was supposed to do a lot more. They actually had a person in the suit moving. It was supposed to do a lot of things, but they just didn't have enough time. So we got very limited time with the spider, and a lot of it was what was it, like stop motion,
how it was moving, type stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was some of the reason why.
I think I get to this end, and I'm like, this ending kind of unfortunately summarizes my feelings for this miniseries. I'm not a fan, and I realize that a lot of people have a huge nostalgic bone for this movie, and I get that 100%. Particularly, I can understand if you were a kid and you saw this would sort of absolutely fucking traumatize me. Absolutely. It just, I don't know. I find it very neutered in terms of like the horror aspect of it. I think the adults are really kind of phoning it in. Outside of like the guy that plays Richie, I think he is like the most animated person in this entire movie. Whereas like, I don't know, the kids are decent. Jonathan Brandis.
Ritter.
Yeah, John Ritter's great. I like seeing him. I didn't think he had a lot to do in this though. But like Jonathan Brandis is the kid I enjoyed. Seth Green. Weird seeing him as a complete nerd. Like I don't know. So this is not my favorite. I apologize. I'm gonna give it 2 hiya Georgies out of 5 for me, because it's not for me.
Don't. All right. First of all, never apologize. That is your opinion, and I totally get it. Again, if I seen this much later in life, I probably would give it the same rating. But again, it has. It's nostalgia for me.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I totally get it, though. I understand.
Yeah. What about you, Mary Beth? How many hiya Georgies?
So I think I'm gonna give it 3 hiya Georgies, because I think it's like, it's one of these movies where I obviously didn't see the full thing until yesterday without knowing it, but it has had such a chokehold on me in terms of just knowing what it is and being fascinated with it. And like, I think I also sometimes conflate all of like the it things and properties together in my head a lot of the time as just like one big cultural impact. But I think where I have issues with the miniseries, I also think it has its own strengths, especially in terms of trying to look at cycles of trauma and things like that. And I think it's so very 90s, which is both a fun thing to revisit and a terrible thing to revisit. And I think just due to like its impact and the Tim Curry of it all, it gets 3 hiya Georgies from me. Bobby, you have the final word. How many hiya Georgies do you give it, miniseries?
I'll give 4 hiya Georgies. I know it's a lot, but again, it's nostalgia for me. It's one of the movies that just scared the living hell out of me. Without it showing too much, like I explained earlier in this episode. And again, Tim Curry's performance just was great. The music was creepy to me. It set the tone of this film. The way they look, it was little things that got me. Again, like the book opening up and maybe seeing Georgie and then it winks like that. That creeped me out. And then the blood coming out. That was a great moment. You know, and even like I said in the beginning with the little girl on the tricycle, there's a lot of creepy moments in here that still stick with me. I still find creepy. Yeah. And I don't know. I just enjoy this movie overall. And I have to give it 4 higher Georgies. I love it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bobby, for making me sit down and rewatch this for the first time since like 1994 or 5, probably.
Yes.
Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have? The floor is yours. What do you have to plug or talk about?
Okay. You can find me, Bobby Torrez, with a Z, not an S, on social media, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. Bobby Likes the Spooky on the YouTube. The People Under the Scares podcast on all podcasting platforms, wherever you listen. Screen Kingz on YouTube. I'll say YouTubes. On YouTube at 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. I'm on the Alter Tapes on the podcast.
Oh, that's right.
In case, I'm on that. And in case you might find me on things. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, look, I ain't doing this, but I'm here. I make it work. Occasionally I'm doing things with Fangoria, which is pretty cool. Shout out to Phil. Yeah, you can find me all there and things I got coming up. Again, I'm on Screen Kingz at the moment, and that's it at the moment. I'm putting out new YouTube content soon.
Hell yeah.
Hell
Love
yeah.
to see that.
Thank you.
Listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with the It miniseries? You can let us know by sending us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, sign up on Patreon.
Please, thank you. Thank you to Eric Parr for our music. Thank you to Sean Keller. Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. I'll never get our outro right, even though we've been doing this for years. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.